हेलो अभिवर्धन, कोर्स ले लो।
ओके सर।
ये क्या है आदित्य? ओजी का इवेंट है और आप फ्यूचर ऑफ इंडो पैसिफिक बोल रहे हैं। काय वक्त हो?
भाई अभिवर्धन, तुमने जो ना जाने अनजाने में ओजी के साथ इस स्पेस को कंपेयर करके मीम डाला था, वो अभी सही हो गया है। सेम टाइम पे अपना स्पेस चल रहा है उनके इवेंट के टाइम पे। क्या है अभिवर्धन?
Okay, I did not expect that. That's funny.
And another funny thing is you are doing it at the time when there is an India-Pakistan match.
Well,
For
India.
that I am glad. For that I am glad. I hope if I contribute to few people watching it, even better, right?
Yes. Few people watching it is even better. I totally agree. Happy to see Venkat after a long time, though.
Yeah. Venkat Anna.
I'll just mute myself.
Let's wait for 5 minutes, then we can start, even if many people join or not.
Yep.
ज्यादा लंबा नहीं रखते हैं। तीन चार टॉपिक 10-15 मिनट में निपटा देते हैं। 1 घंटा अगर कुछ ज्यादा ही लोग आके खींच दिए तो ज्यादा से ज्यादा 1.5 घंटा, उससे ज्यादा नहीं।
उससे ज्यादा नहीं है। अरे आज तो ऋषभ भाई को आना है। हाँ,
वो बैडमिंटन के लिए गए ना, अब क्या कर सकते हैं।
Oh, Saris playing badminton. Nice. अच्छा, he wrote it. Okay. And yeah, honestly, we can keep this English, Aditya. You say.
Yeah. We can keep it purely English.
Yeah. A little bit nuggets of Hindi can be added, but we will keep it English like 70%. Something like that. Anyways, kidding.
Then what happened to people like Venkat Anna? Then they will say our Tamil Mahan.
Although ironically, I made a mistake weeks ago by identifying a Tamil vlogger in Lucknow as a Telugu vlogger. That was the biggest blasphemy I did. I still remember Satvik being like, "Ye kya ho gaya?" But anyway, that was like irony of the day. Tamil Avadi Alliance is there. Anyway, but yeah. But I think this is like we are just reviving our.
What are the broad topics you want to limit it to? Like if we are talking about the future Indo-Pacific, do you want to start it from the India perspective, or do you want to keep it the regional neutral perspective? I mean, anyway, if you mean talking Indo-Pacific, there is no way you can't keep it India-centric, because Indo-Pacific is all about India.
All about India. Yeah.
Yes, but if you don't want to be so narcissistic and so then we can say maybe other Pacific regions are also, but yeah.
नहीं थोड़ा साउथ ईस्ट एशिया डिस्कस करना भी चाहिए मजा है
यार इस टॉपिक के लिए मैं कितना रुका हूँ पता, आसियान सेंट्रलिटी के धज्जे उड़ाने के लिए आज।
No, I think we should discuss ASEAN centrality for sure. मजा आएगा, धज्जियां उड़ानी भी चाहिए और मजा कोई बुराई नहीं है. I think this is good because okay, number one obviously India. हम इंडिया से शुरू कर सकते हैं. Okay, we have Sougat. You can invite him as a speaker, but what I'm saying is
अभी और तुमको बंगाली आती है तो सौगत जी को बंगाली में इनवाइट करो.
यार my ancestors are Bangla, but I don't know Bengali, man. That's the sad part. So it's an irony.
ऐसे कैसे चलेगा सौगत जी? अगर आना चाहते हो तो हाथ उठाइए सौगत जी.
No, you can invite him, right? Like you can invite any listener as a speaker. Anyways, let it be. But I think एक तो obviously India, obviously we can discuss that India-US factor a little bit, not too much.
नमस्ते सबको.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
So do you think we should start? It's 8:05.
Yeah, we can start, sir. We can start.
Yep.
Yeah, then if people want to join, they can join. Yeah, we can start because we can't keep on waiting forever, right? So there is that. Abhi, do you want it to be just a standalone thing, or do you want it to be part of Bharat Pacific series? This part.
It will be just posted on Spotify and then Substack, and it will go on YouTube.
So you will put this thing on that.
Yes, we'll put it on Substack.
So you want me to introduce it as a continuation of Bharat Pacific series?
Absolutely. Yep. It is our Glocalise roundtable, but like a revival of sorts again after a very long time. So yeah.
I think it's been over an year actually.
एक साल हो गया. Yeah.
A lot has changed since then.
Yeah.
Lot is an understatement.
Yeah. It's an understatement.
Yeah. So hello everyone. This is Aditya again. We are back. The Glocalise series of the Bharat Pacific podcast series. I mean, it's been a long time, since a year we have done this. Anyway, so apologies for the long pause, but Abhivardhan and I am back. Today, the way we are beginning this is a bit unusual than the other times. Other times we had a bit structured systems of having only experts and all, but today we are keeping a bit free for all, not all, but kind of free for many types thing. People can be a bit impromptu, a bit chill and all. Our Rishap Bhai is also here. Welcome, Rishap Bhai.
Arey wah. Then we'll discuss India-Pakistan.
Yeah. So after a long time, after the whole world has gone up and down, we are again coming back to the foundational question of this. Basically, the foundational question of everything at the moment. You go to any area, then you will start questioning the very foundations of the history of that region, politics of that region, social equations of that region. Because we are run Bharat Pacific podcast, so for us, Indo-Pacific is at the core of everything. Of course, we also discuss other stuff, but today we want to discuss the future of Indo-Pacific. So Rishab bhai को invite नहीं दिया क्या एक second?
Actually, I'm not a co-host for some reason, so.
क्या बात किया? Invite to co-host तो किया था.
Okay, now it is okay. It's gone. Anyways, you can invite him as a speaker. You can invite me as a co-host later. Anyways,
Rishab, did you get the invite?
And I got as an invite as well. So working pretty well. Oh yeah. Well. Okay. Oh man, my goodness. Okay.
Aviral is also here. Aviral, welcome back to the Bharat Pacific
vicinity. Happy to have him. I've invited Paijan as well. It's up to him how he reacts. But anyway.
We have sent the enough invites to keep the conversation going. But before going into the specific sub questions like nitty-gritties, I will start with you, Abhivardhan. The simple question. It's a very small question. What is the future of Indo-Pacific today at this point?
Very mid. If I mean simple question, the simple answer. It's very mid because it will be very slow. It will be painful. It will be slow. It will not go away, but like I think we are back to India, Japan, Australia trilateral. It feels like that. So a lot of rubble will happen on that front because the Americans have messed up. So that's the way how I see it. Because obviously everyone thinks that Indo-Pacific is all about India-US relations. Sadly, for a very long time, it has been that thing since the revival of the Indo-Pacific Quad. So obviously, wo to hona hi tha. That counter effect was obvious to happen. But then it is what it is. So, well, let us see. I think मुझे लगता है we should pivot to Southeast Asia faster than anything because West Asia तो हम लोग कर ही रहे हैं. But the faster we pivot to Japan and Southeast Asia and ASEAN countries, I think while we can still pose for ASEAN centrality and all that stuff, anyways, see, I'll be a bit blunt on this. People might be offended. Asia Pacific was a very China dominating concept. So much so that even in the earlier times after the Bangkok Declaration, Bangladesh was not considered a part of a larger Asia Pacific, even though now obviously we considered in the APAC definition that even all the so-called South Asian countries are a part of it. So wo bhi tha ek part mein. Considering that, it's interesting how times have changed. But I think India, Japan, and Australia will have to make more effort to make Indo-Pacific relevant than the Americans, to be very honest. So, yeah.
Abhishek, would you like to elaborate from there on the part where, as a Indian scholar who also works on East Asian relations, basically predominantly East Asian relations. So, can you give both the perspective, East Asian perspective, Indian perspective in this equation? Where is the future of Indo-Pacific? Where is this going?
Thank you, Aditya, for hosting this to the space. I really think it's a good time to talk about particularly Indo-Pacific. And I think I partially agree with Abhivardhan that the future of Indo-Pacific is quite uncertain, given that US stance on particularly security commitments and economic ties, particularly in the recent months, has gone through a turbulence period. But I would also look at this from a opportunity perspective from India. For instance, like if you look at even though Indo-Pacific is about the inclusion of India within the security and economic architecture of the region, when you look at this particularly from the Indian perspective, it kinds of give India an opportunity to forge better and closer tie with the region with regional partners, particularly I would say as Abhivardhan mentioned, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, or popularly also called as IP4 countries. So it's a good development, given that this given opportunity for not just India but also other countries, because most of US allies and partners in the regions have traditionally depended upon US for their security, security, and on China for economics. And on the both fronts, there is a lot of uncertainty. Like for US, they on security issues, there are a lot of demands from Trump administration. Similarly, on China, when it comes to trade, I think traditionally it has not panned well for these countries. So both US allies and partners are looking at for instance diversifying their foreign policy, having new relations and better relations with other countries, and India fits perfectly into that space. So, for instance, if you in the last, I would say one year particularly, you would see a lot of Japanese companies have not trying to move to India. And similarly, there is a trend which is picking up with Korean companies also. So I think this is positive for India, but I would caution on one thing that when we look at this development, particularly from Indian perspective, even though there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to US and its alliance in the region, still there is no alternative for countries like Australia, South Korea, Japan, or even New Zealand. So to expect that all these countries will start moving toward China, or even with work with India to establish a new system, I think that would be quite naive for India's part. Traditionally, this is not the first time when for instance, US has gone to is going through a domestic period where there's a lot of uncertainty. There was this during the Vietnam War, when US was there was a lot of uncertainty at that time also, and during Iraq also. So this is not the first time. I would caution people who look at this that this is the new era of Indo-Pacific countries rising up to take a certain, took a different position. But definitely, I would say, like what happened during the last time during Trump one administration, where under the leadership of Shinzo Abe, Japan was kind of taking the as kind of the first responder, trying to bridge that gap of what US left during 2017 and 2021. I think that is happening again, but I would say in that sense, these countries will try to try to make sure that the architecture in the region remains free and inclusive. In that sense, what is the basis of the Indo-Pacific construct, but also at the same time. To expect that these traditional US alliances will weaken is, as I mentioned before, it's quite new. I think so. We are seeing two developments taking place in the region, particularly the regional countries taking more responsibilities, including India. You would see in the last 3-4 years, India is being more forthcoming. We have seen a spite, a kind of a number of strategic partnership signed between India and Southeast Asian countries. Last year it was Malaysia, then Singapore also. Then we are also looking at establishing. This year it was Philippines. So there's a lot of strategic partnership which India is forging with the regional countries. So this is one development which is taking place, but at the same time, we're also seeing other countries in the region being more forthcoming in forging strategic partnership with India. So I think that's thing. So even though I would say in the next 3 years it will be very difficult for analyst and strategic expert to predict what is the direction of Indo-Pacific in context of security and economics. But I think broadly, I think the Indo-Pacific future is quite I would say on a good ground, given that the institutional mechanisms between US and its allies and partners are still very strong, even though the political rhetoric is kind of dominates the news circles. Thank you.
Yes, Yuri, you have a question or a comment? If it's a comment, I will
Yeah,
let first.
I have a comment. Yeah.
If you have a comment, can you? I will come to you after I go to Rishabh first. If
Yeah,
you have a
sure.
question, then I will allow.
No, not a question. Thank you.
Yeah. Rishabh, then I would like to take the cue from where Abhishek left. Does can Indo-Pacific exist without United States? Do we have enough capacity at the moment? For instance, can India, Japan, Australia, Korea, and maybe couple of ASEAN countries can they manage it? The central question of Indo-Pacific. What has been the central question of Indo-Pacific? What was the
I
thing
mean,
that Shinzo Abe in 2007 envisaged? The balance of power against China, right? So can Indo-Pacific exist without United States?
Yeah, hi. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, hi guys. So I think the thing is Indo-Pacific is anything you want it to be, right? It's a framework, and I think if you're using it as a worldview of sorts, the way to look at Asia, what's happening in Asia, etc., that's not going away because fundamentally, as you rightly said, it is essentially about balancing China, whether we like it or not. We like to kind of beat around the bush, etc., etc. But ultimately, Indo-Pacific was about that. It was about reorienting or rebalancing, in a way for America to kind of reinvigorate all its alliances, partnerships, etc. And I think fundamentally it won't go away. I think what has happened though, and I think it's a good thing in my opinion, as somebody who's been studying Indo-Pacific, from my master's days and whatnot, I do believe that there has been some sort of a readjustment of expectation, and I think that's a good thing precisely because if everything is Indo-Pacific, then nothing is Indo-Pacific, and I think that is the problem with what has happened with how we frame things in our discourse, how we have framed things in the Quad as well. Uh, and that's one of the weaknesses. As I mean, many people, even though people who are big supporters, etc., they tend to make that mistake. Now, I don't think. I mean, Indo-Pacific, in terms of interaction between countries, can of course exist without the United States. You have trilaterals, as Abhi pointed out before. We have that, but I think fundamentally because this is about the future of Asia, right? I mean, you may not like to, we may not like to use the word Asia, Pacific, etc., but ultimately it is essentially about the future of the balancing of Asia, the power equation that exists therein. United States and China are going to be at the center of it, right? Now, smaller players can, of course, balance. They can get together. They can work together. You can get countries like Indonesia and others to, be on board. You can have more institutionalization of diplomatic energies, etc. But I think what we need to do, we need to kind of step back, and I think that there is going to be a broader discussion. I think within Indian foreign policy in the next few years, where we would like to, I think there will be a debate of sorts how the Russians had in the 90s. People who have studied foreign policy would probably know that there was a huge debate between Eurasianism or Eurasianists and the Atlanticists, right? Looking in terms of what should be the main outlook or the direction at which our foreign policy should focus. Now, of course, in India, we like to keep our legs our hands in every concept and whatnot. But I think there is going to be a fundamental debate now. When that is going to happen, etc., I don't know, but I think there is going to be a more scrutiny towards these frameworks, these bodies, as to what purpose does it serve. And especially at the time when United States is kind of wobbly at the moment. Now, I do agree, even though I am I mean, I'm not a an outright champion of everything that happens between India and United States of America, but I do believe that relationship and how the US is going about things, I don't think that fundamentally changes anything per se. I think rather than talk of American retrenchment of sorts, like, or the talk of isolationism and whatnot, I think it's the opposite. I think it's America getting its house in order and kind of telling its allies and partners to to get back in line, right? To get their house in order. Now, of course, because it's so chaotic and whatnot, it sounds, I mean, it is not something which is done in a very organized fashion, but I think what they're trying to tell a lot of their partners also, and here I think we'll also have a question to ask ourselves, is what can you do for the region. So a lot of times, how Trump has treated its allies in Europe, there's a clear cut understanding. Oh, this is allies are are a burden. They're not doing burden sharing. There was this talk of allied parasitism in Trump 1.0. I think that debate is also going to happen in Asia as well, where the United States is going to ask other countries, especially Korea, Japan, and other people who are treaty allies, to do more. What can they do more in the region? And there was a lot of talk about India being the model partner for this administration. People who were people like Elbridge Colby and etc., who were talking about India as the role model ally, because it doesn't ask for much. It wants to do things in its own region. I think that part is kind of going away. Uh, I mean, it's kind of like contradictory in some ways, where United States is not always going to act, in as a coalition of sorts. Everything is not going to be talked about, discussed with other partners, but at the same time, they would expect you to do more, carry your weight, etc. But at the same time, fall in line when they need you to do so. So it's going to be challenging.
I have one interjection, Rishabh. You said, like in Europe, US will ask some amount of resources from its East Asian, Southeast Asian allies for burden sharing.
Yeah.
But while we are talking about burden sharing, is America actually interested at all in the very objective of that burden sharing?
No, so that's the thing. I mean, ultimately, when it's about balancing, if you talk about balancing China and whatnot, uh, what the United States has been very, I would say, I mean, there is a complaint, and this is not a Trump issue, as I mean, a lot of people would not agree, but it's not a Trump thing, where a lot of times United States and the government and some sections of the government feel like a lot of the countries are not putting their weight behind American, what America would like them to do. And of course, the same can be said about, America right now. So it's going to be a contradiction of sorts, where countries would look at the United States, where it's dealing with China, it's trying to cut deals, it's trying to come at some understanding with them, but at the same time, they want their allies to do more. So I mean, it's going to be a challenge, but I do think, and this is where a lot of people in the United States have been looking at American policy and saying it's very confusing and whatnot. But from my perspective, and again, this may not entirely, every demand that they make of of their allies and partners would not directly be about probably balancing China or deterring China, but also at the same time, it would be things like give us more access, buy more weapons, stuff like that, right? So it will basically be, I think the problem, and I think this is the core issue, they want to centralize a lot of the decision making, and I think some countries in Asia would have a problem with that. I mean, I think we discussed Indonesia, but I think countries like Vietnam, etc., which are which are kind of more balanced in their approach. We'll have to look at them. Philippines, as I think Abhishek pointed out, these are also important countries, but and but I think there's a huge amount of gap between how Philippines approaches the Indo-Pacific, a country which we have, increased our, strategic relations with, and there's the very different aspect with how Vietnam and others do. So there is going to be a contradiction, but I fundamentally do think that there is going to be a readjustment of expectations from our end also, and that it's a good thing, right? And I think in terms of just there's a lot of buzzwords and whatnot that we like to use. I think a lot of that will, has taken a backseat. Just looking at, throwing around big words and whatnot and frameworks, etc. I think we'll be focusing too
My,
much on what
my favorite
everybody can do.
my favorite buzzword is ASEAN centrality. Till
you
that,
you
I
know
have no
you know
idea what that means.
everybody remembers here. I mean, before all this kind of, before all this became so gloomy to talk about, you remember Indo-Pacific Economic Framework? What happened to that, right? I mean, so many things I can count on my fingers. Of course, there are always these papers, etc., that's been written about, and suddenly some of them kind of wither away. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. At least countries are trying to do some things. But my point is, it's good to kind of get a corrective from our end, right? And it also tells us what our own limitations are as well. So I don't think it's going away, but I think that we can't talk about the future of Indo-Pacific without talking about how the Americans approach Asia in general, right? And by last point, I think I'll end here is, you know I think there's also going to be a small debate. I hope there is a debate about what, from India's perspective, is there too much focus on the Pacific part and not the Indo part, right? Remember, I mean, people who were the early researchers in Indo-Pacific, remember how we thought of that geographically from a constructivist perspective, right? I think there's going to be some, or there has to be some debate, or at least discussion on that. Where, if we have, for example, the Quad, right, and other kind of these small partnership, trilaterals, etc., where do they stand on some of the issues that are happening on the Indo side of it, right, in the Indian Ocean, so to speak? Yeah.
So before we continue on Rishabh's part, Yuri, now you can have your comment. You had something to comment, right? And you can also add on if you want to add any other parts. Yuri?
Yeah, I just have a couple of small points to make. I hope I won't take too much time. So the first is with respect to what I call as the shift from West Asia to, I'd say, the Indo-Pacific, as you call it. I think the US has been too involved with respect to CENTCOM and all the disruptions that has been happening in West Asia for not just the past 2 3 years, but for the past decade or so. So I think India will also have to define some sort of a doctrine when it comes to the Indian Ocean region and the Indo-Pacific. And one way I feel that we will be more committed to this is with respect to economic entrenchment in this region. I'd say the exploration of oil and gas in the Paracel Islands along with Vietnam, or something on the lines of that. I mean, only if you get economically entrenched like the Chinese are, you do uh, have quite a large say in it. That's my first point. And the second point is with respect to the US behavior in the Indo-Pacific. I, I, for, I feel that the US is basically recalibrating when it comes to its European theater. That I think any sort of US withdrawal or anything that is being seen is always happening in the European theater, whereas the Pacific theater does not seem to have any sort of, I'd say, disruptions or any sort of recalibration that the Trump admin has been doing. So I believe that the US is fundamentally a Pacific power before it became a European one. So I do not believe the role of the US is here to diminish or anything like that.
So thanks for those comments, Yuri. So taking from where Rishabh said, the main point that I want to highlight what Rishabh said, maybe we highlight too much of Pacific part, but not enough of the Indo part and what India can do about the Indo part in the Indo-Pacific. So let's come to the Indian Ocean. Sougat ji, now we like to see, at least we like to claim that India is, I mean, I don't think it's a hegemon, but it would like to be a hegemon in the Indian Ocean part, from the East African shores of Indian Ocean to at least the Singapore part. So this vast area of Indian Ocean. But we have troubles there, right? Bangladesh, Myanmar, Chabahar, a lot of the naval part there we have facing trouble, and we are not building enough capacity to match that vision. What is happening there? What can we do? Like, are we doing enough for the Indo part of the Indo-Pacific?
Thank you, Aditya. So I will take. I'll just go back before the question. I think there were a couple of important points which needs to be said, and then we can definitely I can take a stab at answering this question. One thing is this Indo-Pacific future. I think I agree with the Rishab's point. Is without the focus of United States, I don't think so that this will be a stable future, at least at this point of time. I understand United States is going through a transition, and the coming period will define how uh, they are looking at this particular region, the alliance and overall objective. But without United States, I don't think this becoming a very successful objective, to be very very honest. That's one part, because I think there was a question whether the other partners, Australia and India and other partners, can make uh, take the responsibility and actually do something about it. I don't think so at this point of time. That's a reality. The other part is, I think in the next couple of years, once the administration changes or probably the new leaders come in, the vision might evolve, I would say. Because if you heard in the last couple of weeks, the national defense strategy document which the United States have already, I think, published, and it's currently within the administration at this point of time, not in public domain. Once that document, I think, is in public domain, we'll have much more clarity what's their vision, at least from a long term perspective, for Indo-Pacific. So I think that is one thing which we need to keep in mind, because their priorities will evolve, and that's how the future would parallelly evolve in that way. Now, coming to the question which Aditya, which you mentioned, I think in the region for building capacities, I agree with the point. Bangladesh, at least to the best of my knowledge, is sitting at a very, very, very crucial point in terms of politically. At this point of time, the elections are in February 2026. I don't know how things will pan out. Myanmar uh, is again boiling through civil war, a lot of factions. So I think the government, from a policy perspective, I think we will need to bring some sort of an innovative approach in terms of approaching these regions, because the current strategy won't help you drive this in a way, in a meaningful way, which actually serves the nation's interest and strategic interest. So I think a new approach needs to be thought of uh, in a way which actually caters to our long-term strategic perspectives and our interest in the Indian
And,
Ocean region.
and sorry to cut you, just to add, Chabahar is going nowhere, and we are facing even more problems there.
See, Chabar, I think has been talked about a lot, so I don't want to touch about it at this point of time. Um, I think that decision on the Chabahar from United States is more focused on Iran rather than focusing an attempt on India. At least that is my personal view. Though the revocation might be considered that it was targeted India, but I think it's more messaging to Iran rather than India at this point of time. But again, I agree that Chabahar is not going. But again, from inner perspective, how much have we actually developed in a way, like we have invested a lot in Chabahar, but the
We have not.
ROI doesn't seem to
We
flow
have
in the
not
right.
invested at all.
Yeah, sorry, Rishabh, go ahead. Sorry, you were saying something. Sorry.
No,
Yeah.
no, he said
See,
we have not invested at all. He's just
this
adding
is
to your
my,
point.
this is my point. When India is being asked, and this is something that we Indians have to ask and answer these questions. When India is being asked to do a lot of things, and which a lot of things which India also wants to do by itself, by the way, ऐसा नहीं है कि, is somebody telling us and that's why we are doing it? Of course not. But my point is, if there are so many fundamental discussions about um, what India needs to do in Taiwan, in South China Sea, with Philippines and others. India has upped its engagement with Philippines, for that matter. I think everybody probably knows that we have kind of elevated our strategic partnership and whatnot. There has been talk and actual delivery of arms and missile systems, etc. So we are, in that sense, engaging with that part of the world a lot more than many people would have expected India to do. But my point is, at the same time, and this is where I again comes back to the same point: how much does our Indo-Pacific partners, and especially Quad, etc., how much leeway or importance are they giving to India when dealing with the Indo part? And again, Chabahar, technically, remember, if anybody remembers, in 2015, 2016, there was this huge debate where Shiv Shankar Menon, I think at that time, had asked the same question as to how much convergence would be there between these partners when it comes to issues that are happening in the Indian Ocean side, especially the western part of the Indian Ocean. Now, again, in terms of Chabahar, etc., I think if you look at, I mean, we now the annual budgetary allocation that we do is 100 crores, etc., 100 crores, from our end, and I think that's happened for the last 3-4 years when it comes to Chabahar. But are those investments actually, are they able to go, or is that being actually delivered? Are we working with the Iranians, etc., enough? Not so much. And a lot of people have talked about how Iranians are not doing enough. Well, since the first Trump administration, how much has India tried to do to actually fight off against the American pressure that's been coming from their side? So of course the other side is going to kind of stay back if you are also not committed to kind of put your foot down, right? So investments have been really slow. I mean, there was this issue of arbitration, which was kind of the sticking point between India and Iran. That was resolved in the last 3 years ago, I think, 2 years ago, I think. And then we came to this 10-year long term contract that we signed last year, I think, in May, right? Between the port authorities and whatnot. Now, again, you can say whether American action vis-a-vis Iran is not targeted towards India. It is more meant, it is more meant to signal to Iran, etc., to come at the table and whatnot. But the point is, it does impact the flow of funds, etc., from India side as well. So it is a casualty whether you like it or not, right? So again, we may
And
not want to see.
that impacts India's Indian Ocean capabilities.
Absolutely. And again, I think I shared it on my Twitter as well. The tonnage, vessel traffic, etc., container traffic, etc., handling has gone up. Now, it could have gone more. It could have, and again, it can be utilized even further, right? If, for example, we try to come up with some workaround, and I know I'll be the first one to admit the sanction package on Iran in the last 5-6 years that has been put in place. It's very very tough, and it's very risky for Indian companies to risk exposure. I understand that point. I'm not trying to belittle that point, but and again, this is where I think Indians also need to kind of understand something. You can't be blaming other countries for not doing enough when you are also not, your actions have also taken a backseat, or your priorities have also changed. So not everything can be blamed on Iran, Russia, etc., etc. And remember, I think people kind of forget. Uh, I know INC, STC, etc. are not, in the, they're not very hip to talk about. They're not very cool to talk about right now. But if you look at some of our, interaction with Central Asian countries, from Jaishankar, from Doval, etc., these guys have been talking and trying to come up with some new arrangements and whatnot, give a kind of renewed push to other infrastructure project which kind of connect. So also have, you can't just have a port system, etc., and expect that to be connected to Europe or Central Asia, etc. That port has to be connected through railroad connectivity, to the areas which actually matter. And it is that part which gets hit if the United States kind of pushes us a lot in a very assertive manner. So I don't think we should be expecting, only have expectation from other countries and forget about our obligations to these countries, right? So yeah.
So Saugatji, continue whatever you are saying, and you can also add on Rishab's point. Shall India be taking more risk at this moment,
Yeah,
even if
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
even if it comes at the cost of American relations?
See, I think there has to be a line, right? If we have to grow in the region, and if we have to, we always keep saying that we are the leader of the global south, then we make these huge claims. I think at a point of time there has to be some sort of concrete actions, and yes, I do agree that we will have to share our burden of responsibilities further. Otherwise, it's just all talk and no action. I don't think so that that's the right way to approach this. uh, on the other front, I think, the conflicts, at least in the next upcoming decades, will also have a play a pivotal role. How the relationship between the partner countries, how United States, those things will evolve. So I think the conflicts will also play a major role. At least the South China Sea, the Taiwan conflict, all these will play again, will have repercussions on the overall dynamics of the region also. So that's my thought at this point of time. Thank you.
So, Abhishek, I would like to bring you into this conversation. Now we are talking about responsibility sharing, burden sharing. I remember like the days of Asia Africa Growth Corridor. I don't know how many remember in 2017-18 when Abe and Modi promoted it a lot. Most of the burden sharing, especially resource sharing, was all Japanese at that point of time. Of course, a lot happened that was shared. Another rechristened versions of it kept on coming. But of course, the shared projects have been happening. India and Japan continue to invest together, but most of the burden sharing has been Japanese. But at this moment, Japanese are being squeezed by the Trump administration. They have to focus too many things at once. They have to spend on their own self-defense forces. They have to commit to at least certain amount of money to Trump to invest in US in addition to the tariffs, etc., etc. And all this while their economy isn't growing anymore. They are just there. And same is happening in Singapore, basically. Of course, Japan is spending a lot in India. Singapore, sorry, not Singapore, South Korea. I meant South Korea. South Korea is also trying to invest a lot in India, especially in the shipbuilding sector. Now, of course, it will take a lot of time for India to build enough capacity to be the primary burden sharer. For instance, maybe in 2035, when India is 8 trillion, $10 trillion economy, in Chabar, maybe instead of 100 crore, it might spend 1,000 crore a year. But that is a long, long way, right? It will take at least 5 to 7 years, at least, for Vadhavan to finish. There is, I mean, it has also been, India has also been trying to share some of the burden. I mean, giving some of its visionary projects to private sector like Adani having some of the port capacities in Israel, in other parts, in Australia, coal capacity, etc., etc. So Adani is investing. L&T is doing some of the premium infra projects wherever necessary. But our private sector is still not there yet. So what will happen in this transition period? Who will share the burden? Where will the resource sharing? I mean, I don't know. I don't. What will happen, Abhishek?
Uh, uh,
Basically,
I
पैसा
think
किसके पास है? पैसा किसके पास है? औकात किसके पास है? Simple. It comes down to that, right?
yeah. So I think so. There's so many questions which you asked. I think just before coming to your question, I would like to just clarify some of the points which were made by earlier speakers. I think Risha was pointing out to how the shift is taking place in the transatlantic partnership when it comes to, for example, on issues such as spending on defense budget particularly. I think that is already taking place in the region, Indo-Pacific. When it comes to, for example, I think I remember correctly. Uh, Pete Heck said there was, in his speech during the Shangri-La dialogue, he made it clear that the demand for 5% defense budget is not just for the European region; it's also for Indo-Pacific. And there have already been conversations when the U.S. administration has asked its allies, including Japan, South Korea, and Australia, to increase the defense budget, and it has been received positively by all these by US allies. Of course, there are some exceptions or some discussions or pending issues. So they're already these discussions is already taking place behind the scenes, and there are so many reports pointing towards that. So I think that's a kind of positive development. And the second thing is with respect to, for instance, as Rishabh also mentioned, the role of we mainly talk about the Pacific part when talk about Indo-Pacific and not much on Indo part of it. And I think like for me as a as a scholar, when you look at the discourse behind the Indo-Pacific region, if you compare where is the action taking place in the region, it's not in Indian Ocean region. It's although there are still critical developments in the region, which is for instance increasing role of Chinese activities, or you can take, for example, the Houthis and what happened during in the Red Sea. Although these are important developments, but these are not still, for instance, what you call as existential to countries. So, for instance, there is of course the Taiwan issue, which is there, and it can some different people have different timelines for that. So I think that is one of the reason where why much focus is not given to in Indian Ocean region. But I would say that one of the reasons for behind the Indo-Pacific construct was to bring in or kind of link both the Indian Ocean region and Pacific together in a kind of common architecture. And of course, one of the reasons was to bring in within the India within the security architecture of the region, but also to bring Indian Ocean within it. And I think we have seen certain positive developments. Like if you follow the Quad's joint statement in the last 6 years, you'll see a kind of incremental recognition of India as India's role as a legitimate or the primary actor, for providing security in the Indian Ocean region. And this is being supported by, for example, Japan, Australia, and US through Quad. So this was a positive development, and India was looking at Quad to gain that legitimacy as India as the primary responder in the region. And if you look at recent what Navy did during the Houthis action, I think that was a recognition or also a show of India's capacity in the region. So I think, of course, Indian Ocean should get that kind of attraction, but I think because much of the action is taking place in the Pacific, that's why I think that's one of the reasons for me. I think why the Indo part doesn't get that attraction. But coming to your question, I think. I think for me, the Trump administration period is kind of a pass away. Like there are certain changes which are happening, which are indeed very concerning. But still, I would put this in context of an incremental and evolution of US foreign policy towards the region. And I think if you look at it, I think that's a positive trajectory. For instance, the creation of US, Japan, South Korea trilateral is its institutionalization. The US, Japan, Philippine trilateral, the US, Japan, Philippine, Australia, AUKUS. All these are the development which was which took place under Biden, although some of the conversation was already taking place under Trump. So, and these have been continued, although there are certain issues with respect to it. But I would still say that that security architecture which was established by the Biden administration is still intact at the institutional level, although the political rhetoric may change, here and there. But for example, if you look at the exercise between US Department of what we call now War and its counterpart with Japan and South Korea, it's only going strong. Like there is no at that level, at the institution level. So I think that is a fact which most of us need to recognize. That although these comments by senior officials may comes with like that you have to do more or you have to do this and that, but at the institution level, the cooperation is still very strong. And I think in that sense, I think it gives also chance to regional countries, including India, Japan, and Australia, to do more. So, of course, Japan, is doing a lot already in the region, particularly in Southeast Asia or South Asia. You were mentioning about the Japan and India's the prospect of Asia Africa growth corridor. Although I think like many people have written on it, like why it failed, what were the shortcomings of that project. But still, I feel like India's role in the region, Japan's role in the region, Australia. If you take these three
And
players
South
and
Korea. I mean, South Korea may not be
huh,
part of Quad, but actually it's invested in quite a lot of strategic projects. Actually.
yeah, so even like South Korea, if you look at like these four particular countries, they are doing a lot in the region. And I think and there's expectation that during the Trump 2 administration, from the Trump administration, of course, but also within the region, that both, like I had conversation with a lot of people in the strategic community, and if you talk to diplomats, like there is a recognition that like India needs to do more, and for Australia needs to do more. And I think the good thing is that within this Indo-Pacific construct, it gives all countries an opportunity to focus on certain geography. Like India, when it comes to India, it's Indian region. When it comes to Australia, it's Pacific. When it comes to Japan and South Korea, Southeast Asia is there. So I think that this kind of, even with the recent developments with Trump administration, there is concerns in all capitals, but still I think it gives all these countries an opportunity to do more, take more responsibility on a hell of issues, like for instance, and the recent India Japan joint statement, if you read it carefully, it's the first time where India has talked about economic security with any of its partner, and which is a very positive development when I look at it, because I think one of the main concerns in Indian foreign policy has been, particularly in the last 6 or 7 months, has been about this issue of strategic autonomy. How do you manage with it? So I think one of the reason was that because you are more dependent on other countries for for economic security, that kind of constrains your capacities. I think so. With, for example, with working with Japan or South Korea in sectors such as shipbuilding or semiconductors or for electronics manufacturing, I think you kind of create those capacities which will lead definitely in short to long term or mid to long term to creating your capacities and giving it more space to India to emerge as a credible actor in the region. So I think in that sense, I see the future of Indo-Pacific in a positive sense, in
But
that
Abhishek,
there are a lot of.
but Abhishek, again, I come back to the fundamental question. In this transition period, in the era of Trump resource squeeze, do everyone have the resources? Does everyone have the resources to actually put enough money into the projects? Basically, I mean, 5 साल का प्रोजेक्ट क्या 10 साल ना हो जाए क्योंकि वो ट्रम्प को हफ्ता देते देते बेसिकली.
Yeah, of course that is an issue. I concur with this argument, but you also need to recognize that there are changes which is taking place in the region. For instance, if you like for the first time, Japan is pondering upon exporting its frigate, exporting destroyers to Philippines, which is a new development and never happened before in Japanese history. Japan is also recently announced that it will give a radar system, Unicorn, to India. So there are things which is taking place. India is also increasing its defense partnership with the region. Yeah, of course, if America would pitch in more strongly, that would definitely help the region. But I would say, like, America is doing bilaterally a lot of things. For instance, it's creating industrial capacity with Philippines. It's also doing the AUKUS is still there. Of course, it's under review right now. But I think looking at the broader shifts in the region, even though we are looking at it from the political lens, I think so that kinds of shapes a narrative. But I would say if you look at this institutional engagement, it is only going up between American allies and partners. It's not going down, and I think that's a positive development. Yeah, I think if the politics kinds of align with the economic and the security issues, that would be a positive news for all allies and partner. But that's not the case. So I think all countries like India, Australia, Japan, South Korea, we have to kind of manage for this time being, and I think that's the only way we have to go forward. Yeah.
So Kushalji is a new speaker. Would you like to add anything to the discussion, Kushalji?
Well, I can share my experience. I've been traveling consistently right now in the United States of America. This is my second trip. I am still in America right now. I was trying to conduct interviews, off the record interviews, with obviously with a strict guarantee of anonymity with policymakers, thinkers, and many other people, even celebrities. And I was just trying to understand what the American establishment is thinking and what is the long term game they have in mind. And to my utter shock, the unanimous answer that everybody gave was there is no thinking, or they don't know. That matlab, it is so shocking. And you associate a level of nuance, long term attitude. uh just I'll stick to English. I'll not speak in Hindi. I'm sorry. I keep going back to Hindi, and I apologize for that. um uh you associate some level of sophistication with American foreign policy, which is the norm usually. Even with a Biden administration, where I think for the last 2 years of the Biden administration, I think Joe Biden was not the president. Like I pretty much think wo banda so raha tha, kind of a thing. But there was a consistent like streamline of ideas where you could predict, like if you were a betting guy, you would predict, okay, the Americans are going to do this, the Americans are going to do that. Here, what? So I'll give you a very tangible example. And this was cross verified by me by confirming this from three sources. Okay, I tried to confirm it. Like I have a three sources rule. Like at least go to three sources to confirm. So usually, how the Americans operate is they have like these weekly briefs that different bodies of the government, they tend to send it to the White House, saying that okay, this is what we're supposed to do, this is how we look at it, this is how they look at it. Under this current administration, that entire system has been junked. I'm not kidding. The entire system of briefing, everything is like feels. Like I feel like this, I feel like that. Today I want to do this. Today I want to do that. And everybody has their own take on what this administration is doing and for what probable reasons they're doing it. Somebody says they're just, it's his second term, so the gentleman involved, the president just wants to collect as much moolah, like money, and who gives a damn that. Some people told me it is out of sheer vendetta, and the gentleman just wants to go after people who went after him during the Biden administration, so he doesn't care. There was another major analysis, and this was more from the Democratic leaning people. So I have to take a lot of things they say about the Republicans with a grain of salt, because obviously, right, there are political biases involved there, just like you would take whatever the Republicans say about the Democrats with a grain of salt. So what they say is that the Groypers, or whatever you want to call it, the Vignats, they have literally taken over the Republican discourse completely, as far as this administration is concerned. And yes, I do see signs of that, but then I don't know how much of it is real and how much of it is fake. Like that's the one thing I could not pinpoint. But I'm dead serious. It is an apps. You can't help but laugh at the situation here. There were moments that I just couldn't control my laughter while I was interviewing the person off the record. Like I just started laughing, and that person was like, "Why are you laughing?" I was like, "This is so stupid. Like, how can an administration work like this? This is literally the strongest country in the world. This is the global hegemon. And if the global hegemon is going to behave this, and if you are any country across the world, and if anybody thinks they can manage America right now, this administration, they're just lying to. The only way I think, my only rational response in this entire scenario is just wait. You have no other option other than wait with this administration, because they say something in the morning, then they turn in the evening, then they turn again and tweak it in the day after. How do you hedge your policy based on someone as unpredictable as this? Which is this is my initial thing. And this and from the Indo-Pacific perspective, I think, to be very honest, the Indo-Pacific has to look beyond America now for the short term. Like, I think the Indo-Pacific has to now start thinking that without America being a player, how can we work with other smaller players? Because obviously China and America are the biggest players, right? Or am I wrong as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned? I don't know what you guys think. If
Yeah, America, China, India is the three major players.
yeah, so okay, so yeah, I was just trying to be humble and not name India. Otherwise somebody would have said ki I am Vishwaguru, hungry hippo Vishwaguru kind of on steroids. So that's why I avoided saying India. So that's the only reason. But uh, if these are the major players, and clearly, let's be realistic, okay, if the comparison it is between China and India, the China is a bigger player. I think Indians have to be realistic about their place in the world, but we cannot rely on this administration in America is so unreliable. I believe we have to come up with short-term strategies with individual countries of how do we deal with it. And I guess in a way that's what Trump wants. Trump says, you do you deal with yourself, I will tariff you. Like this entire tariff game that Trump is doing, At first, I thought it's a joke that, when I met people in DC, New York City, trust me, I have driven personally more than 6,000 kilometers because I wanted to go around everywhere possible before I draw some conclusion. And everywhere I would ask them, like, why is this happening? Like, China buys more oil. They're like, no, he has some personal grudge. He feels slighted. Everybody is saying that. I couldn't believe that. I still don't believe it. I refuse to believe it that a man can be as petty as कि उसने मुझे टॉफी नहीं दी. But this is where we are. So I think, as far as the Indo-Pacific is concerned, we should carve out our own future in this region without expecting America to do anything. This is my opening remark. I don't know if it makes sense to anyone else.
So Satvik, I would like to jump in from the Chinese perspective, as in you speak Mandarin, you follow a lot of Mandarin media, Mandarin commentary, etc., etc. So, what are the Chinese thinking about the developments in the region, basically? From Indian, I mean, what are they thinking about India in the Indo-Pacific, America? Are they at all thinking about Indo-Pacific anymore, like they used to think few years ago?
I mean, they always keep talking about it. It's not like they haven't they stopped talking about it. But I would say over like the narrative for the last, I guess, 5, 6 years has been that, the US commitment to the Indo-Pacific, the commitment it makes to individual countries is rather overstated. That's a lot of what the Chinese believe. I think in pretty much every writing they've had on India, they assume that the India-US convergence is there. They think that India's already made the choice to converge with the US. However,
And
in
many
everything
believe,
there,
and many believe that perception of convergence is the reason for whatever happened at Galwan. I don't know if it's true, but many believed it as one of the reasons. Do they think that anymore? That's the question.
yeah. I mean, and they think, and what I would say is where Chinese scholars differ on is whether they think this convergence is durable or not. Whether they think that the U.S. or India will hang each other out to dry, and therefore it's an unreliable partnership, and therefore you can't. These countries will not really be able to effectively coordinate. That's one camp. The other camp says that they'll have hiccups in the relationship. However, there's going to be real capacity building on both sides, and therefore any overtures that China has to make with India is going to be is going to be doomed, and you have to treat India much more adversarially. And recently, a lot of them have said that are coming around to the view that this is not as durable as a lot of people think it is.
So from there, I would like to go to US Finance. US Finance. Now I think you are one of those. Among the people I have talked to, you are perhaps the most hardest China hawk I have known. As a China hawk, do you think Indo-Pacific can survive 3 years of Trump, 4 more years of Trump? Because the reason why I'm asking this is while Trump is continuing to doing what he does, God knows what he is doing, but in this time period, there is going to be an year where there will be a discussion on if Xi Jinping will continue as president for another term, because in 2-3 years that question will rise. There will be midterm implications if Trump loses. Basically, midterm elections and the Xi Jinping's possible re-election. I mean, I don't know if you can call it re-election, but I am calling re-election, are within the period of 1 year gap. It's literally in that year. So 2027 is the question of if Indo-Pacific can survive Trump. And if Trump loses midterm and if Xi Jinping wants to maintain his dominance, I personally think that is their year when Taiwan question will actually be at the top of everyone's mind, because that aligns with all the timings that you can think of, basically. So that's why I'm asking you, Svenist, can Indo-Pacific survive 3-4 years of Trump anymore?
I think it can. It definitely can. But deeper answer to your question, I think you can divide it into like three almost distinct halves. So the one half is, I think, Kushal briefly touched on this when he was talking about the Groypers, and which is
to put it very specifically, it's a question of the GOP staffers, right? So the young generation of GOP staffers, and when I say young, I very specifically mean between the ages of like say roughly 21 to like 31. That age range is the cultural milieu in which they have grown up is unlike the cultural milieu that previous staffers grew up in. We know from some reportage, and I might have to like go back through my archives and try and find these reports. But there's quite a lot of reportage to suggest that there is this echo chamber wherein the more extreme your position as it pertains specifically to things like immigration or even economics for that matter, the more your voice will be heard amongst your peers. So sort of what we saw even amongst the far left of the Democratic Party, such as the Democratic Socialists at one point in time, before they moderated quite significantly, though I don't think they moderated all that much. That's a very real problem, right? Like recently, oh gosh, this is like I'm going off the top of my head here, so I don't remember the specifics. But someone pretty senior was caught like quoting Julius Evola, for instance. So if any of you don't know who that is, he was a leading light within the esoteric fascist movement and someone who held some, for the sake of the space, I'll say pretty extreme views. So that's one half of the conversation. So how does that GOP staffer turmoil affect not just American politics, but also America's relationship with multiple other countries? That's number one. Number two is uh, China as a, so the way China behaves in the Indo-Pacific, I very strongly think that no country will give up on the United States purely because you want some kind of balancer in the region. And no matter how sour their relationship gets with the US, there will always be some kind of pragmatist hope that eventually whatever administration comes after the US will be more amenable to not just the necessities of security within the Indo-Pacific as it pertains to these countries trying to build a relationship with the US, but also the US's broader interest within the Indo-Pacific. So what I mean by that is if you look at American politics right now, there is a lurch towards isolationism, right? So of the kind you saw in the 1930s, the Buchanan era kind. And even though that is a very powerful strain that has emerged even within the Democratic Party, though it dresses itself up in other clothes, there is still hope that it has not defined American politics completely, right? So it has defined it, but not completely. There is that hope. And then the third and I think fundamental point is, at least from everyone I have spoken to, and I obviously can't reveal names for pretty obvious reasons, uh, there is this pragmatic belief that whoever comes after Trump will not be as extreme as Trump right now. Whether that's good, whether that's bad, it's a completely different question. But that strain of thought does exist. And there is very much this feeling at even not just in India, but in a bunch of other countries as well, that this is a storm that will eventually blow over. And what comes after will not be as extreme as what was. And in that sense, even though I think you can sort of take the cynical view of this and be like, America's changed permanently or that Trump has been a paradigm shift, I'm not as convinced by that argument, because if you look at a lot of the opposition that has emerged to Trump and the people who might replace him, especially if they win within the Democratic Party, I'm not saying they'll be super pro India, but they are not going to be anywhere near as volatile as Trump is when it comes to international relations, and certainly won't allow things like mean words being said about him to impact how he sees a country. So I think I'll stop there because I think I've rambled on quite a bit.
So from there, I would like to go to the another big player. Is it a big player? God knows. Europe, basically. So Abhivardhan, Rishap earlier said, if everything is Indo-Pacific, then nothing is Indo-Pacific. Like this takes back to that old joke, right? If everyone is a strategic partner, then no one is a strategic partner. Like India had this with every bilateral document of India, you had this mentioning of strategic partner, strategic partner. China को भी strategic partner बना दिया.
By the
This
way,
is kind of
does anybody remember what happened to all the Indo-Pacific documents that Europe released?
Oh my goodness, that thing. Yeah, I mean, Germany.
yeah. So
Yeah.
that's what I want to come back to. Like, I mean, I can legit understand if France wants to focus on Indo-Pacific, because to whatever limited extent France is an Indian Ocean resident power, and France has legit defense relations deep. In fact, it is going to another stage if all the news articles are correct about saffron deal. So it will be even deeper with India. So it has legit stakes at very deep level. But beyond that, Europe trying to somehow talk about Indo-Pacific in everything and somehow reorient its attention to Ukraine and all. Maybe IMEC you can say is an Indo-Pacific thing, but even in IMEC till Gulf, it's India and Gulf countries investing their own money. From there on, it's just Europe doing its own thing, right? So I'm not sure. What do you think? Like, does everything have to be Indo-Pacific in everything, Abhivardhan?
Well, first of all, Indo-Pacific, one idea is definitely, I mean, yes, it is a China hawkish or anti-China or China resisting thing, whatever it is. I mean, whatever the terminology anyone takes. But I think one thing obviously is that the Indo-Pacific is something which will be reliant upon emerging markets. So Europe has become desperate to partner with India because obviously Germany and France have their realizations, and that has affected the European Commission. But yeah, obviously everything is Indo-Pacific, then nothing is, because problem kya hai ki if you are just not focusing on what regional partnerships can be leveraged, then what it is, then what is then the Indo-Abrahamic, right? Then what is the Euro-Atlantic? वो सब नहीं है क्या? Does it not matter? So then what will happen to I2U2? So although I2U2 is still alive, because obviously the UAE and Israel relationship is different here, despite whatever happens with Arab League in Palestine. But with Europe, I think number one, it's purely economic. It seems on a funny note, or it's a very common thing that we have come back to the basics of industry policy everywhere, because we have some problems in some shape or form with agriculture communities across the world. The least said about Canada, India, and US, the better. But we all know that, right? So Europe may be that is also to some extent connected with the CBAM thing with Europe, the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So yeah, but मुझे लगता है कि Indo-Pacific should be treated in that sense that, okay, this is my theory. Again, I'm theorizing. I know what Rishap literally accuses other people of, but I think that the Indo-Pacific idea should be like, obviously India centric, not ASEAN centric. ASEAN can be a very good partner, eventually ally with India. Maybe, I don't know, एक दशक में, दो दशक में, maybe in two decades. But it's like India with the West Asian, Southeast Asia as a larger focus, and then maybe specific partnerships can be done with Europe. But I see some potential with the erstwhile Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth countries, the DAC countries that we call out, like for example Austria, Poland, those kind of countries, not like the older European powers. I also see with your Estonia and all those tech savvy Eastern European countries, not necessarily Ukraine that much, because Ukraine is a totally different thing altogether. So otherwise, agar economic hata de, then honestly, except France, Europe has nothing much to offer. I don't even
I
think
will
Europe
tell you.
Aditya,
I
before you
will tell
just
you
go
the.
on,
Hello.
before you go on, can I just add to what Abhivardhan was saying, if you don't mind?
Yes. Continue.
Yeah, I'll make it quick. I won't belabor the point. All I wanted to say is within Europe, there are two countries in particular that will have a stake in the Indo-Pacific. We know that for a fact. One is France. I know people have talked about the saffron deal here, but it flows much deeper than that. I mean, there is a very good argument to be made, and I don't think it can be lightly pushed aside, that the French for decades now have tried to make themselves a bigger and bigger share of a bigger and bigger share of India's import markets when it comes to India's import market, when it comes specifically to defense systems. They have I'm trying to find the right word here. They basically have for a very long time tried to make themselves what Russia has been to India. They've not accomplished that yet, but you can definitely see that there are ambitions uh, within what the French say and what they do as it pertains to the Indian defense market for that said aim. Okay, so the saffron deal is just one thing, because I don't think people understand the gravity of what's happening, especially on their M88-4 engines that they're offering to India, right? So they're actually directly competing with the Americans here. Because so for people who don't know, you basically have three fighter programs that you can say form the basis of the Indian Air Force, right? The spine of the Indian Air Force. You have the LCA Tejas Mark 1A, which is currently in production. HAL is currently pushing them out. Then you have the Tejas Mark II, and then you have the Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft, right? The AMCA project. Now, the Tejas Mark 1A is outfitted with the GE404 engine. The Tejas Mark II, everyone widely believes it's going to be the GE414 engine, and the AMCA is going to use a different engine. We are working with the French for that. Okay. The difference between the 404 and the 414 is the amount of thrust each engine produces. Now, the French are saying that we will come in and we will offer you a, a direct competitor to the F414 engine, that is the M88-4. Now, if India selects the M88-4, what that means is at least two projects, right? The Indian Air Force that the Indian government is running for the Indian Air Force will feature French engines, which is an extremely large contract and will make the French an integral part of our defense policy, whether we like it or not. And that is definitely something that they're going for. And in doing so, they will be displacing the United States. How that impacts our relationship with the US is yet to be seen, right? Because we know that Trump is not the most rational of people, but whoever comes after Trump will have to carry this load as well, so to speak. The Germans, on the other hand, are also starting to step up movements within the Indian defense market. For example, I don't know how many of you know this, but in the Project 75, the people who won the Project 75 tender were the Germans, right? It's the Thyssen Group, I think Type 214 submarines. We're going to place an order for 6 of them, which again is a pretty big deal. They have also shown recently steps when it comes to, so for example, there used to be a lot of complaints within India about how the Germans have like human rights concerns about Kashmir, and that's why they won't sell us firearms, for example. A lot of people missed this news, but the Germans recently dropped that, right? And the entirety of the German government has given a concerted push to try and sell more arms in India, and that's primarily because the Koreans are undercutting them. So if you look at the Polish that Abhivardhan just mentioned, and the arms sales that are going on in their market, the Koreans have come and just wildly undercut all the German arms makers. Right, so Germany is also scrambling at this moment, and they will increasingly see India as a golden opportunity to sell their arms. So that's another country you need to watch out for. Outside of these two countries, it's really on a case by case basis, and how much their governments are pushing for a relationship with India, and also how much they see India's relationship with Russia as a problem, right? Because, for example, you get leaders like Kaja Kalas, for example, who will in one breath say that we are completely understanding of India's relationship with Russia, and then in the next breath she's like issuing very wishy-washy statements over the Pahalgam attack that very lightly, if at all, condemns the act of Pakistani terror. So with Europe, I think as a monolith, it's hard to say which way it will go, but definitely it's sort of the two leading powers that are the power center within the EU, which is France and Germany. They will have a very strong interest in the Indo-Pacific, even if it is just for the defense market.
Before moving on, I would like to just add a comment here. Like, I was just following the press conference of India strategy document of the European Union, and I was just literally laughing at the ignorance and the lack of depth of the region among their commentary or media, even the officers who were commenting on it. Basically, like one of the journalists asks, "What do you have to say about India-China close alliance?" Just because Modi went to SCO, they think like India and China are somehow allies. And the officer who was basically presenting the India strategy document is responding with affirmation, and he's also actually agreeing there is some kind of a close relationship. And I was like, what the fuck is happening there? Like, so they literally have no depth. They have no idea what is Indo-Pacific is. I think a lot of Europeans are still waking up to it, like what it means, what the region is, etc., etc. All they know is China is big. China has a lot of money. China has a lot of goods, and they sell to Europe. That's all they know. That's it. Yes, Satvik, you want to come in?
I mean, I think that this is the lack of experience on India is something that pretty much every country has. I mean, in the US, very few people that have generalist knowledge on India. Like, there are a lot of specialists, but in terms of like how much knowledge the average generalist has, it's almost nothing. Europe is even worse. So there's just a dearth of India studies and India related strategic analysis pretty much anywhere. That's just the raw truth of it.
Yes, Kushalji, any comment?
So I'll give you tangible examples of how much fun I have in my life as a public commentator and a podcast host. And I think these are the kinds of sadistic pleasures all of you should indulge in if you want to live your existence. Like, so every time I go and I meet these, and when I use the word experts, always remember it is in quotes. So I play this game with them. I came up with this game like 7 or 8 years ago where I would ask standard questions to all these Western analysts of India, and how they have these cookie cutter responses for everything India. See, the reason is they don't take India seriously. That is fine. I don't mind somebody not having India in their top 10 pecking order, but then you can't have the situation where India is not in your top 10 pecking order, and then come as the panchayat ka chaudhary, and then coming and telling me कि तू जानता नहीं है मैं तन्नू दसना kind of a situation. So I play this game with them, and I've done it the most with journalists in the West. It is very entertaining. By the way, I did it in the Kananaskis resort recently with all these journalists who were there at the G7. It was so much fun. So, and all of them failed, unanimously, by the way. All of them failed unanimously. So I'm just backing Satvik up. एक भी साला पास नहीं हुआ, बोलो. So I asked, I start reading statements of politicians of India, and I start reading policies of politicians of India. So recently, I don't know if you guys remember, like it is recent, 2019-20 May was the last time India changed the abortion policy. I don't know how many of you know that. Prakash Zavadekar was the minister at that time from Maharashtra. So we changed the abortion period and we increased it by I think 1 or 2 weeks. Exact मेरे को period याद नहीं है. So I just said this is done. Immediately they said it must be the left-wing Congress government. Immediately, it's an instant response from them, and then I tell them, no, it was the BJP who did it. I wish somebody records these things when I do it to them, which is why they hate me a lot personally, because I do these insulting sessions with them. कि मैं उनको बुलाता हूँ, बोलते हैं ना क्लास में खड़ा करके ऐसे गालियां देना, मतलब तू गधा तू गधा तू गधा. They don't like it. Used to it. Then I do the same where I protect the Congress also. Like I will give some extreme capitalist policy that the Congress did, and they will say BJP must have done it. And then I tell them, bhai.
कुशल जी आप थोड़ा off the topic जा रहे हैं.
But and the same thing you can do with foreign policy. If you take foreign policy decisions and you ask them what is their view on foreign policy, they will go through the same phenomenon. They do not know about India. And a lot of times, what our side does is that we start thinking that they do not do it is because of their hubris. Part of it is because of hubris. Now, here's the kicker. How many Indians have actually reached out and tried to educate them? Do you know the number? How many? Any of you know the number?
No.
It's a giant zero. Indians don't by default. There is no mechanism to reach out. There is no formal mechanism to talk about it. Now, I'll tell you my experience in Canada. I don't do a lot of things in America, but I do consistently reach out to people in Ottawa. I do.
कुशल जी आप बहुत off the topic जा रहे हैं.
तो आपको अगर एशिया पैसिफिक की पॉलिसी, आपका पॉइंट ये था ना कि इंडिया के बारे में क्या इन्फॉर्मेशन है, तो इंडिया के बारे में किसी के पास कोई इन्फॉर्मेशन नहीं है, तो एशिया पैसिफिक में क्यों होगी? Can you point out who in the Asia Pacific region has been told by the Indians about what we are and what we stand for? Do you guys know about that? Indians by default don't do it. My whole point is this. Nobody knows about India, and India is also very happy that nobody knows about them. That was my point.
Yeah, so Rishap, Satvik, yes, I would like to come to the last 2 points that I would like to touch upon. One is critical tech, other is Taiwan. So what's happening in the critical tech space? Have we given up? Like it's over? No more India-US critical tech cooperation? And a lot has to do with how the critical tech cooperation will pan out in the semiconductor, etc., right? In order to fight what China is doing, basically, Chinese capacities, etc. Satvik, you follow that space a lot, so
Um, so when it comes to the critical tech space between the US and India, I would say that there there is at least an expectation of continuity, but I would say it's a lot more hope than it is like they it's all on inertia that like we've already been doing all this that like if you look at all these ISET statements, right? Like there's a whole bunch of different critical tech cooperation avenues that are ongoing and they do continue to go. And it's not and partially it's because the Trump administration does not have the precision to really target any of these instead in when really targeting India. So these continue to happen, especially if you look at like Carnegie India, that they have a whole series of tech dialogues and tech cooperations that they organize. So that is still happening. When it comes to, I guess, the actual economic integration that would actually improve the critical tech R&D space together, that is a lot more under question. Um, because all these tariffs and everything really just make economic cooperation very difficult for different parts of for different economies. Like, so, there's so much talk about critical minerals and refinement of technology. Now there's a lot of hesitance on this. I do think that it'll still continue to happen, but it will be like it'll be a growth along the silos that have already been decided rather than finding new silos to really work together on.
Yus, you would like to add something on that space? For example,
Uh,
anything that Japanese or Koreans or anyone else can fill that space? I know, like, maybe Taiwan itself can
Look,
do, but I
Aditya,
don't.
the thing is, I think maybe Rishabh would like to speak because I might take a little bit more time to explain what I have to say. So I don't know if he'd want to go first because I've spoken for
Yeah,
quite a while.
anyone if they want. Rishabh, would you like to continue speaking?
Uh, just talking about uh, before we jump into the critical tech part, I think it's very interesting how our discussion, like this is what I was actually alluding to before. Um, in the Indo-Pacific in general, you cannot take the US aspect away, because whenever we are, because I think Abhishek earlier pointed out that there are a lot of bilateral mechanisms which are going ahead as it is, right? And that's a great thing. But my point is, ultimately, Indo-Pacific is a framework. It's a worldview, through which you look at what you want to do in this part of the world, right? Which is great. But ultimately, the point is that everybody would have different priorities, right? As everybody pointed out, and here the idea of actually different. How do you align those different priorities? How do you talk to people? Different people, etc. How do we get everybody along and whatnot? I think that's the part of the challenge, and I think that will figure out not just in bilateral terms, but also in organizations that we've had. So yes, it gives everybody a chance to work together, etc. But at the central point of it, it's going to be the United States and how it approaches China and how everybody else takes the cue from them, right? So the fact that we end up going back to these countries and these relationship with the US being at the center of it, we may not like what's happening, and US may be distracted, retrenched, isolationist, whatnot. But ultimately, that it comes back to that, right? So I think that's an interesting thing. But I'll let you speak on the critical tech part. But I would say one thing. I think I think Satvik is right that when you look at ISIT and whatnot, and how, because there's been only very few people who've been working on it very diligently, that part is not stopping, because it is all about giving the private players of both sides kind of a platform to come together and collaborate on the by themselves on the with each other. It's not always going to be very celebratory in the sense that, oh, you have this deal and whatnot. So the governments were essentially giving us like a springboard to all these different companies to come across and build this innovation ecosystem. But I do think at one point of time, and I think you will probably allude to this later on, that there will come a time where we'll again have to ask how much, where, uh, are there areas where we need to kind of look at cooperation but also look at focus on our own indigenous capabilities? Some places they hamper it, some places they kind of forward it and kind of give it a good opportunity of sorts. So I think those kind of discussion will come into the picture, but the fact ultimately is that yes, bilateral cooperation is at the end the fundamental building block of Indo-Pacific and whatnot architecture. But at the same time, everybody's going to have different priorities and different demands or expectation of what the other needs to do.
That's exactly what I was going to talk about. Actually, I hate you so much because you always like talk about the exact point I want to talk about. But anyways, I hope all of you will indulge me in my oversimplification because there are a lot of listeners and I don't know the level to which they're familiar with what I'm going to talk about. So here it goes. Nevertheless, the issue we fundamentally have in India is how do we innovate in military tech? Now, sure, this might be because I'm a hawk, so my natural bias is showing, but I genuinely believe that military tech is the key component to critical technologies because it bleeds very well into the civilian side. So the more advanced your militech ecosystem is, generally the more advanced even generally the more advanced your civilian side will be, because a lot of the technology you use within the military space never really just stays in the military space. Even if it takes a decade or two, it will eventually bleed into the civilian side, right? That's point number one. Point number two, on this point, please realize that we don't live in the 1990s/2000s, right? The Americans, even under, the late stage Obama, when our relationships were thawing out and was getting better, under Trump, when Trump was, Trump 1.0, basically, the non-insanity Trump administration, where he had professionals guiding his policy framework, and as well as the Biden administration, though how friendly the Biden administration was, especially towards the latter end, is a debate. Even under all three administrations that were relative to the present favorable to India's disposition, were extremely hesitant and reticent to share core critical tech. Right. So one of the mantras you'll see repeated often is no one will share critical tech, no one will share critical tech. It's basically an elaborate con game where you come to your audience and say, look, they're giving me 70% tech transfer. In reality, they're keeping all of the main know-how, all of the important critical know-how to themselves, and they're not sharing it with you, right? uh, India has to get very serious about how it engenders its own advancements within critical tech. There are broadly speaking two ways you do this, right? Number one is what I like to call the American MIC, which is, you say, private sector go ham, right? So you're saying defense military research and development, which is fundamentally distinct from private sector research and development, and I wish more people understand this, is done by the private sector. And if it's going to be done by the private sector, you're talking of enormous sums. So just to give you an idea, in India, I recently saw an editorial piece in the Economic Times where a veteran was talking about how 30,000 crores had been spent on the Kaveri program, which is our engine program. And he was wailing about how much of a taxpayer loss it was and how incompetent in general the GTRE was when it came to the development of the Kaveri. In context, General Electric is planning on investing 1 billion, right? Investing 1 billion for 2025 alone in order to expand its research and development facilities, right? That is your competition. Over here, we crib for around 300 million being spent on a engine program. Over there, they're planning to invest 1 billion just to expand R&D operations. That is the context you're talking about. So if you want your Indian private sector to give you R&D advancements, you have to start making them spend, whether by hook or by crook. Okay. Number two is what I call the OKB model. OKBs were basically old school Soviet bureaus. Both Rishap and Satvik will know what I'm talking about. What the Soviet Union basically did is they built massive design bureaus. The very best within their societies usually got jobs at these design bureaus, because if you were a military scientist, it was like so at the very top were the Politburo members, below them were the military members, just below the military members were the military scientists, right? Because they were fundamental to the Soviet Union competing with the United States. And that is how you get, for example, the Mikoyan, the Sukhois. Mikoyan and Sukhois are basically design bureaus. So the Sukhoi 30 MKI that the Indian Air Force runs, that comes from the Sukhoi bureau. The MiG-21s that we're going to retire, that comes from another Soviet design bureau, I think the Mikoyan design bureau. You can do that model in India. It requires a very good administration. So it requires the administration to be proactive, closing up loose ends, firing corrupt administrators, having our eye on the balls, understanding project management. So the government of India is not just sitting back and saying, okay, we need the CAG to give us reports on whether a project is feasible or not. it is actively making decisions and saying, okay, even if we drop $1 billion on this project and it fails, it's worth it because we need to push research and development, right? These are the two fundamental choices we have before us, and right now we are deterring. That's why if you look at if you look at specifically at military critical technology, India is lagging behind both China and the US, even though we shouldn't really be comparing ourselves with them, but that's besides. uh, right now what we can do for just so for example over the next 5 to 10 years, the startup scene and the MSME scene in India are showing a lot of promise, right? So a lot of critical technology that we need is actually a lot of the private sector research and development we're seeing is coming from these spaces. So maybe we can have within our defense establishment a policy geared towards allowing these startups and MSMEs access to a lot of the infrastructure as well as institutional knowledge that the DRDO has. And in fact, when the DRDO does partner with private sector startups, what you start to see, or private sector companies, what you start to see is really positive end results. Just as an example, the ATAGS project, which the Indian Army is going to procure, they are basically our artillery guns, is a direct collaboration between the DRDO and Baba Kalyani, right? There are literally hundreds of projects that are going on right now where the DRDO is partnering with the private sector, and we are seeing really, really good fruit as a result of this labor. As it pertains to the Indo-Pacific, the reason I keep saying this is very important is because if you look at where the Indo-Pacific is headed, no one can deny that you need critical technology, especially in the military sector, to hold off the storm that is coming. Let me put it that way, right? And if we sit back and we have this conversation of, oh, let's collaborate with the Americans, right, in the vain hope that they will eventually someday be magnanimous and gift us technology they haven't gifted even to their closest allies, such as the United Kingdom, I think we would be making a tremendous mistake. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening, but I'm saying let us be wary of this. Let us call this out. Let us put this out on the ether. So somewhere, some guy who's drafting policy for the Ministry of Defense goes, okay, that's an interesting thought, right? The second point is, if we are collaborating with the United States, be completely ruthless in what you want and what you're willing to give, right? If you I made this point a long time ago, right, on my previous Twitter account that no longer exists. I had warned people, and a lot of people within what we call indigenous defense Twitter, so people who lobby for indigenous defense developments, we had said repeatedly, if you partner with the United States on the F404 and F414 program, you are creating long-term dependency on the United States. So when something like Trump happens, where he's now put a 50% tariff on your country, you can't just say, I don't like that, I'm out, right? The avenues to retaliate are limited now, because all Trump has to do is, you know what, engines are going to be delayed by a year, right? And watch the chaos unfold in India, because our entire program now relies on them. So it is key, and I repeat, it is key that India shake itself off of this stupor that it finds itself in, and realize that it will have to invest vast sums of its own money at the cost of multiple other departments, right? And personally invest political capital, to be quite fair, of any government that's in power, in order for us to stand a chance at not just competing militarily with other countries within the region, but also developing critical tech in other areas as a consequence of this tech bleeding into the civilian space. Now, independently in the civilian space, you can have multiple other developments, but unfortunately, I've spoken long enough, and I don't want to belabor the point too much. So I'll just stop it over there.
Yes,
I
Satvik,
would also,
jumping.
in addition to this, from in the United States, I feel like there's a growing kind of perception that the tech differential that they had enjoyed with respect to China, that would give them an advantage in any kind of conflict, has been eroding very, very quickly, and at scale. And I think that a larger number of U.S. planners are recognizing that like maybe during the Biden administration, that they had taken for granted that the U.S. and in China could fight, and they could have an actual conflict where the U.S. could come out on top. I think that this increasingly within the Trump administration, even if they don't admit it publicly, a lot of them are really questioning whether they will be able to do that. And that may start shaping their decisions when it comes to how effectively they were really willing to cooperate with India if they are privately I guess, questioning themselves.
I'm very sorry. I'm very sorry, Satvik. I'm very sorry. I'm cutting all of you, but this just slipped my mind, and I must doff my hat to Rishap here because I remember interacting with him on this. So this is where the thought comes from. But basically, Ashley Tellis, and he's made this point repeatedly, by the way, and in much better words than I can. If you look at both Ashley Tellis and Howard Lutnick, right? They represent, in some senses, the same thought across two different aisles of the American political spectrum.
Exactly. Same. I cannot agree more, actually.
Right?
True, true.
So what basically Rishabh had outlined very well is he had said, look, Ashley Tellis is saying, I am dissatisfied with where the relationship with India is right now for human rights. Long story short, it was basically saying America won't toe the US line and therefore I'm dissatisfied with it. Howard Lutnick says the same thing. He only uses trade as his bashing stick, basically. And you saw shades of this with Robert Lighthizer, right? If you read what Robert Lighthizer had said before, he got into a very ugly bust up with India's trade reps during Trump 1.0. And that thought has been brewing within the Trump camp for a while now. The reason we didn't see it hit us in Trump 1.0 is because it developed toward the fag end of Trump 1.0. And also, he had multiple other professionals, specifically people within the security apparatus, who are not willing to risk the India relationship over what he wanted on trade. So that sort of mitigated that effect. But from this moment on, I think we very seriously need to ask the question of, are we dealing with an American administration on either aisle of the political spectrum that is as favorable to India as it was even 5 years ago? And just to cap this point off, I drag all of your attention back to an article that was released at the beginning of this current Trump administration, where all of us discovered that the Biden administration had been delaying Apache deliveries to our, I believe it was either the Army or the Air Force, right? And what had happened is Trump had basically come in and said, okay, these orders get expedited. But the background story is the Biden administration was basically looking for concessions from us in an area that they had not specified, but that they were trying to extract concessions and using Apache deliveries, which we had paid the money for, right, and which we had reposed faith in them for, is very concerning. So I'm sorry, Rishabh, I stole your thunder there, but yeah, I think that was just important to be brought up.
Yes, Satvik, continue. You were somewhere before use was.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So regarding the US's own estimation of itself and China, is that, if, I mean, this is something that I've heard from various stakeholders in the US, is that a lot of them don't really since a lot of them are realizing the scale of the Chinese challenge towards them and their own inability to really counter it effectively, that if a lot of them see the concessions being made to India as like, what is the gain? And that, I mean, that had been being started to ask, like at the end of the Biden administration, and especially as the new Trump administration was coming in. But I think one thing that India will have to prepare for itself is, what to do with the US that, out of its own reasons, trying to, find some flow with China, decides to reduce strategic tech cooperation. And that should be a contingency.
Abhivardhan, you raised hand earlier. Before I continue with this discussion, you wanted to interject on something?
Nah, I just wish to add something on the AI side of it, but I think
Yeah. This is still critical tech thing. You can jump in with AI perspective also.
No, so I'll just add one thing. So recently, obviously we saw
But
one interesting thing with
not
India.
not to forget, you have to bring in the Indo-Pacific perspective in that.
I will, because a lot of Indian tech policy, even in digital side, actually, I think this is my theory that 50% of it is just India-US relations. So what happens is that, see, one thing which is very good happening is that India can partner with a lot of countries and can create alternative ways. Okay. And I totally agree with what you said on DRDO partnerships with the private sector and even Bharat Foj. I did some follow-ups after Operation Sindoor. So on AI, one good thing which I saw is that because tech behavior capacity is going down, I think one thing which I realize is that number one, LLMs are falling down. But the good part is that the whole tech cooperation was not necessarily about LLMs, it was about data. So when you have these consortiums and things where you give good money for compute and other things, at least you can ensure that for indigenous data set, which we actually now need, and ye har desh mein chahiye. It's not just India. It's also needed in Southeast Asia. It's also needed in West Asia. Okay, Dubai is also concerned about it. Europe ka to पूछना ही नहीं है, right? Even China had this thing with, its own platforms. I think we have an interesting moment because we have Gift City right now. If we can we think about better data economics and better data quality cooperation? I think that is a very good niche which I see. Beyond that, if we think that LLMs are the only future of AI, then I think a lot of India AI missions objectives are not clear because obviously the sanctioning and all makes no sense. That was my addition to it, but it definitely comes to critical tech because a lot of AI is still classical, right? Even in space, even in defense, wherever you will never use a LLM for defense tech. You use that, boom, a lot of TOT issues will happen and stuff. So yeah, I think on data we have a good opportunity right now. And even if we don't have a DPDPA implemented or data protection law, it doesn't matter. We can still make it happen because we have certain places, we have a GCC policy. So yeah, that's one avenue I see, but it has to be done sooner than 6 months to hedge the impact of US relations because that is causing a lot of problems to us because we are too much affected by this obsession that we'll just only partner with Meta, we'll only partner with OpenAI, this whole obsession between OpenAI and other Indian government institutions. So that is not helpful, right? So if we finally are openly considering India Japan relations at a different level, imagine what we can do with them on data and even AI when they are far brilliant people, especially what Google Japan is doing in research, right? You can follow even the work of Google Hyderabad, Manish Gupta. So that's how I see it. That's on the AI part, but nothing more, nothing less.
So from this critical tech part, I would like to segue into the last question. Is Taiwan all about semiconductors use for the United States at the moment? At least till the Trump is there, or is there more to the Taiwan question? And does India have anything, any contingency for next 4 years at least on Taiwan
Aditya,
question?
can you just come back to me in 1 second? I'm just having technical issues on my
Yeah,
end, so I'm just sorting it out.
yeah, Rishabh, you can take the question. Is Taiwan all about semiconductors? At least for Trump administration.
I don't know because I think probably the Trump administration also doesn't know. But I think it gives a good window into how they are approaching. And again, I come back to the point I was making before. There's a very contradictory kind of an approach, right? There is some sort of a unilateralism that they want to enforce on their allies and partners in Asia in terms of following their lead. But at the same time, I think the point that we were making with regards to allied parasitism, burden sharing, and etc., all that will increase at the same time, right? Now, I think Abhishek was making this point that there's already they have talked about how especially treaty allies like Japan, Korea, Australia, they're supposed to be increasing their defense expenditure, right? They're now asking, just like they're asked NATO countries to, ramp up their defense expenditure to 5% of their annual budget, right? Now that's a good thing, and on the face of it, that looks good, right? Something you can argue that all these countries might anyway want to do, but the point is, how do you want to spend that money, right? Now it is here where the unilateralism comes into the picture. Now whether you are able to put this effort or resources together and actually come up with some sort of a jointness of not just purpose but actual material investment into defense of Taiwan and other things, that is, I think, is yet to be seen. So it is about semiconductor. I mean, if you look at Elbridge Colby's views on Taiwan, and if again, I don't want to personalize a lot of their approach because at the end of the day, it's Trump's view that Trump everybody else's. But again, some institutional voices that are still there in the DoD, in the State Department, even Rubio for that matter, I think they would probably still focus on what Taiwan symbolizes for American presence in Asia. At the end of the day, they would like to, and I think Trump would definitely want to, defend if there is an invasion or any other kind of coercive measure from Beijing, right? Because ultimately, I do believe this, and again, I don't think Taiwan is unimportant to India, but it I don't know what we can offer if, for example, something as, if a military conflict breaks out. But I do think that for Trump also, it's a prestige issue. It would be a prestige issue, and I think everybody can attest here. If something matters to him, at the end of the day, it's his image, right? A lot of times, remember, he's blamed Biden um, for the meekness that he has had, and how, for example, Russia decided to invade Ukraine while Biden was president, and the same wouldn't have happened if he was president, right? So I think it's not just that for him. There would be a lot of coercive deals, forcing the other to invest and whatnot. But I don't think he looks at it purely as that. Now again, all of it depends on, again, how they deal with China, which I think bears more attention than it's given currently. I think even from an Indian point of view, um, there is a possibility, and again, it's a very remote possibility right now because the entire American establishment is geared towards a military competition, etc. But I do think there is now a growing realization. I think Satvik was pointing out earlier that it's not as easy as they thought it would be, right? And again, it doesn't have to be a military amphibious invasion of sorts. A lot of things China can do, and again, it's here that we also need to talk about East Asian countries and what would happen in case, for example, the Russians, if they come into the picture, how they perceive the Indo-Pacific to be, how closely aligned they are with China, the timing of it, etc. All of that is going to matter. So it's not just semiconductors for them. But I would let you pitch in, then we can discuss about how India fits in, whether it, if at all, it fits in.
Yeah, so use is Taiwan all about semiconductors for America at the moment? At least assume for next 4 years till Trump administration shadow lingers, and within this time period, as I said earlier, there is a 20th session of CCP when perhaps the next term of Xi will also be decided. So for him, it becomes a prestige issue, right? For Xi, so there is that also.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the delay, by the way. And also on a slightly lighter note, imagine being Elbridge Colby, right? You spend literally years preaching about the Indo-Pacific pivot, and you finally get a position as an undersecretary within the Pentagon. And first day of the job, your legs are on the table, you're stretching it wide. You're happy to get down to business. You switch on your terminal. You switch on your laptop, and like right there, the ticker tape reads 50% tariff on India, right? So just I genuinely feel for that guy, because imagine going from that to that. But regardless, I think the view on Taiwan can be best summed up by a confluence of three different forces acting within the Trump White House at the moment. So you have like this uh, you have a you have a wing within the US administration that wants to be perceived as being transactional. Why I say perceived as being transactional is they are not exactly doing transactionalism. They're basically LARPing as mafia bosses. So, for example, every trade negotiation is about, how America is winning, and, how it's going to be a fair deal for the both of them. And in reality, it's just, it's a zero-sum game where America wins and you don't, right? And they want to be perceived as having this transactional relationship with literally everybody when it comes to foreign policy, right? So at one point of time where you would at least have the pretense of an administration saying, the values of Taiwan are important to us, being a democracy so close to the Chinese mainland, acting as a shining beacon against Chinese authoritarianism, that just doesn't exist anymore. So if that doesn't exist anymore, what you get is like this, what is basically said over and over by a lot of hawks within the Trump administration, that this is about semiconductors, right? But as Rishap points out, and this brings me to the second force, there is also this energy within the White House that does not want to be seen as losing. Like no matter what happens, you don't lose, right? Now suddenly, for example, if the question around Taiwan turns into a question of US prestige, then the calculation shifts. Because if it's about US prestige, there is no, I don't know, there is no bar high in, there is no bar that the US administration wouldn't jump over in order to maintain its own prestige, because that's just the way the administration is moving at the moment. And the third confluence is the Pentagon. right? So it's all of the people who actually do this for a living, who actually write policy papers for a living, who spend decades and decades within this field, who have been building relationships up, who entered the Trump administration expecting it to be Trump 1.0, and now suddenly are like, hold on, what's going on, right? So they are the ones who are sort of who are pushing and trying to form these relationships with with the different countries in the Indo-Pacific, as the other wings within the Trump administration are ripping and tearing them apart. And just to buttress this point, I have been in conversations before where people say, okay, this kind of factionalism you're talking about, uh, maybe it's sort of overhyped. But I bring to your attention the fact that the only reason the Trump tariffs saw a moratorium, right? So when Trump basically truths out or tweets out on Truth Social or whatever it is that he's issuing a moratorium, is because, I think it was a Wall Street Journal or the New York Times that had reported this. Peter Navarro was the one saying, no, it has to be hardline, right? Don't go out and say that this is a negotiating tactic. Say that this is a way of generating income for Americans. He is coaxed out of the White House in this like filmy, secret military film action plot, brought into a completely separate meeting. When during the time he's out of the White House, Howard Lutnick and Scott Bessent are smuggled into the White House to meet Trump, and then I think spend about 10 or 15 minutes convincing him to basically tweet out saying that this is a trade negotiation tactic and a moratorium is going to be issued, right? And they stay with him and watch him truth out or tweet out that he's issuing a moratorium, right? This is the degree to which factional infighting appears. Politico recently did another article, for example, where Scott Bessent is widely quoted to have told another senior economic official within the Trump administration that he would punch him in the fucking face, right? And that's an actual quote, by the way. That's not me putting the fuck in there for no reason. And he is also rumored to have gotten into spats with Elon Musk, ostensibly over staffing, right? And badmouthing him behind his back to Donald Trump. So this is an administration that is riven with factionalism, to whom there are a lot of prestige issues, who want to be seen as transactional tough guys, and who at the same time are grappling with a Pentagon and a broader defense establishment that is trying to steer the ship in the right direction and saying, hold on, guys, don't burn all your bridges. We might need them in the future. Now, finally, to the point of how India can come into all of this, look, the strength India has right now, I'm not saying we have the biggest navy. I'm not saying we have the best air force. That's not at all what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is we have devastating missiles at our disposal, right? And you don't need to be, for example, a superpower to how do I put this politely, to inflict crippling losses upon a superpower, right? If the BrahMos exports to the Philippines, I'm sure all of you have noticed, have ruffled quite a few feathers in the Chinese establishment, and that's for a reason. Because no matter what anyone says, those missiles are scary, right? And we are already iterating on the second wave. So we have a next generation BrahMos coming up, which is going to be lighter, which will help it with its ALCM capabilities. But we also have a BrahMos 2, which is coming up. It's going through its own hiccups, but we will get there eventually. This is in addition to all of the other hypersonic missiles that we are testing, as well as our beyond visual range missiles that we are testing, right? So we have a whole range of missiles within our missile inventory that we already have close to, that we are either close to operationalizing or we are about to operationalize very soon. Now we can use these missiles as a strategy to tactically export it to various countries. The only hiccup I have here is that when you talk about exporting these missiles, right, or selling them to countries like, for example, say Taiwan, what exactly are you getting from Taiwan? And is it worth rocking the boat with China? Because don't get me wrong, I'm a China hawk. I don't really like the Communist Party of India. In fact, I like the communists as much as Mannerheim like the Soviets, right? But at the same time, I don't want to start wars for no reason. I don't want my economy to be hit for no reason, right? If I'm going to make a decision, it has to be thought through. So yes, we can hurt the Chinese. We can make life very, 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 very difficult for the navy within Southeast Asia more broadly. The question is, what do we get out of it? Right? So if you are saying, okay, this is just a containment strategy, are we willing to say in an effort to prosecute this containment strategy, we are willing to do the commensurate requirements in order to stabilize our domestic economy, which will be hit by Chinese shenanigans, right? Like before the recent Chinese thaw, I'm sure all of you have also read these reports. They were calling their engineers back, right, because they didn't like where Apple production was going in India. They were stalling key critical machines to India. India started work on trying to build its own tunnel boring machines because the Chinese were playing games over there. Right? There are a lot of areas where we are heavily dependent on China because no matter what anyone says, we don't have the kind of domestic manufacturing capacity in India, and to build them up, it takes decades upon decades of time, money, and resources, a lot of which goes into loss. Right? It's a very capital intensive policy you have to undertake, and it will require a lot of capital. And are we ready to do that as a Republican democracy, where every 5 years a huge chunk of the population decides to vote for people who are less than savory? Right? So that is a key question we need to answer, and I'll just leave it at that.
So I think we are kind of at the end of the topics we want to touch, and we are almost 2 hours into the session. Because Yuri has been silent for very long, maybe I will give the closing statements to Yuri. Yuri, would you like to close the session with few words? Are you there?
Oh yeah, I'm there. I had initially raised my hand when Kushal was speaking. So my question in general was that Kushal was talking about how people in DC or the ones that he interacted with felt that there was no idea
Your
of.
voice is not
Uh,
very clear, actually. I mean, we can hear you, but not every word clearly.
okay, I'll move to a different place. Yeah, am I audible now?
Yeah, now you are better.
Yeah. So I have a question in with respect to what Kushal was talking about how he had interacted with people in DC, and when a lot of people who he interacted with said that there was in general there was no strategy. But don't you think this is perhaps the greatest advantage the US can have right now? That is, no country really understands what the US is going to do, which means that the US is able to do a lot of things which is conservatively considered not appropriate when it comes to diplomacy, and get a sense of the response that the country is giving back to, for example, punitive tariffs or whatever. And this in general will now move on to a stage of better informed foreign policy that they will take.
Yeah, my perspective on that is I have heard this perspective before also. I mean, it might give America an advantage on short-term basis for 2-3 years, but remember, every country is not incompetent, and every country would not like to fall in line as a vessel for very long. So everyone is working behind on their own interests. So eventually that will catch up, and in long term, America, if not Trump, someone will pay the trust jizya. Like everyone is now giving geopolitical hafta to America. Next American presidents would eventually have to return the favor in the form of trust hafta, basically. So in the
Aditya,
long,
in
yeah,
a very compact way, one second, I'll just make this very short and crisp. No, it does not have either short, medium, or long term advantages. Short term advantages, please look at the recent jobs report. The only jobs growth that the US had was in the healthcare sector. Their entire economy at the moment is basically AI and healthcare. In case you don't know what the jobs report was, it basically said that the last year of the Biden administration, they lost about roughly
no,
450,000
I
jobs.
don't think Yuri means that. I don't think Yuri means in terms of tangible economic productivity. What he means in terms of American strategic objectives
Yeah,
in the
but
world.
that's Aditya. You have to understand, right? If you're so, the short-term objective was what we're going to boost We are going to boost manufacturing jobs in the United States. They have lost manufacturing jobs quarter on quarter, right? That has very obviously failed. If you look at medium-term objectives when it comes to countries like India, we are not going to trust the Americans like we once did. If Trump 1.0 is in the White House right now, I am willing to tell you 100%. India doesn't even look at Saffron for its M88-4 project. In fact, it's going to go with the F4E1 for INS-6, right? That does not basically the reason you see such dithering within India, the reason you see such a strong pivot to the French all of a sudden that we did not see 2 or 3 years ago is because of this. And we are not the only country doing it. Multiple other countries are doing it. In fact, the Norwegians scrapped a project they were going to give to a US dockyard. Excuse me, just 1 second.
Just I
Yeah. So they
go
were going to give a project of the Norwegian Navy to a US dockyard, and they didn't, and they pivoted away and they gave it to a British dockyard instead. Right? It had to do with some of their boats. This is happening not just in Europe; it's happening all over the world. People fundamentally start re-altering how they look at your administration and how trustworthy you are, and this bleeds directly into the long term, which I'm sure all of you are already in agreement with, which is it's not going to be all sunshine and rainbows, right? What Trump has done, and I don't think many people even within his administration realize it right now, is basically made it nigh impossible for any American to come here at least for the next 40 years and tell us with a straight face, pro trust us, right? And that has very real consequences because people start hedging near immediately. So I would contend either in the short, medium, or long term, it has not been an advantage. Saying that I am unpredictable and you do not know my next move is only an advantage if you are the only major power. So if you are a unipolar power, if this was the 90s, you can kind of make that argument. I still wouldn't, but we don't, right? It's not a unipolar age anymore. We are steadily heading into multipolarity, regardless of whether the Americans like it or not.
Yes, Rishabh. We will end with you. You wanted something to say.
Slight disagreement there. I think I think it's not as much as how Trump's negotiating strategy, whether it is tactically or strategically, whether they are meeting their objectives or not. I mean, first it's very unclear what their objective is. But the thing is, I think the trust factor is kind of sometimes overplayed. And here I think there's a difference between the allies and the partners, right? Allies don't really have any other bet to hedge per se, and that is why you see them, they're falling on themselves while pledging this and that, etc., etc. Now you're right, there could be some growth of skepticism um, within some of these countries. They might want to reach out and talk to and invest or diversify in other players, etc. And here EU, India, Vietnam, Indonesia, Japan, etc., all of them have a great, they can have a more cooperation in the second rung of all this. But I think fundamentally, and I say this as a US skeptic, by the way, is that the position of United States um, will still, I mean, they will still enjoy the preeminence of sorts, especially for these countries when dealing with China, is precisely because many of these countries don't have any other option. And the level of dependency is very acute, right? So maybe at some point of time, they will, I mean, right now, for example, you saw, for example, the Europeans, I mean, Europeans get a lot of stick for it, but the Australians and others, they are reaching out to China, they're talking to them. So there is this consensus that we have to talk to China, keep a dialogue open, have maintain engagement. If there has been any other trade related or other issues, you kind of talk to them. You try to see, you don't try to basically pick fights, etc. Because there is uncertainty about U.S. policy and in terms of how much U.S. is willing to go, right, or how much antagonism or antagonistic policy is it willing to have right now with China. So there is a problem there, but inherently for some of these allied countries, it's the US is so, I mean, overarching presence is so high. I don't think I don't think Trump by itself or in 1 or 2 years that will easily go away. Right now, here my point is, and I've been saying this for a very long time, is the Indian perspective is slightly different, and because specifically because of the fact that we are not as dependent on them as some of these other countries are, we have some negotiating space if we can try and leverage things. Now, you can say the Americans already have that much leverage, but the idea is if you're going to cooperate with them in every sphere of policy, in defense, in critical tech, in AI, increase economic ties and whatnot, then you are in one way or the other accepting that the leverage that we have against them is kind of will kind of come down. Now, I know, I mean, I would like this to be the case, but I don't think that in the next. I mean, you was saying probably a little bit hyperbolic, I think, but I don't think that the larger diplomatic establishment in India is going to suddenly not trust the United States, and I mean, for me that is a problem. But I still would say that there is a lot of not goodwill. I mean, yes, goodwill has been eroded by how Trump has been attacking and kind of belittling his allies and whatnot. But at the end of the day, if you're not able to leverage your own power, not just with the United States, but actually come out with actual outcomes with other countries, then what other options do you have, right? And it is here I'll go back and I'll end here. It is here I think that there's going to be some divide within Indian foreign policy establishment as well, as to how much, when we talk about Indo-Pacific, do we just look at it as a maritime concept? Do we just talk about Southeast Asia and Taiwan and East Asia, etc., or do we also look at how expectations of India in the Pacific aspect or in the Pacific part of the Indo-Pacific, right, is is equal to or is kind of leveling towards the dedication some of these countries including the United States has to give India the leeway or help India to kind of bridge some of these gaps that are developing with China in the Indo part, and not just the maritime part in West Asia and in in Indian Ocean, etc., but also in South Asia, etc. So I think because we are looking at the world and we have a very exaggerated sense of importance and our weight in the world, we look at these other parts and we are talking about what India does and what it should do. We also have to focus on what is happening in and around us. What is the United States looking, and what kind of a relationship are they having? Right now, I see a lot of unilateralism, not just in Asia, not just with China, but also in South Asia, Southeast Asia, etc. So it depends, for different countries going to be different thing, but I think the trust part is slightly over exaggerated. And I think it depends from country to country. I mean, you can probably pitch in, we can have a small exchange on this, but I do think that the United States, even after Trump messing things up, remains the only option for a lot of countries, and to a large extent maybe in a very unhealthy way for some of them, I don't know. But again, it depends on how they deal with China, and we have to take cues from them. I'm not saying we follow them, but you have to, in one way or the other, see how the two major powers are interacting. Even if it is a multipolar world, the two poles are very clear, right? So you have to see how they are interacting for you to then react to that.
Yeah, so I think we had pretty comprehensive discussion on the future of Indo-Pacific. Last question: does Indo-Pacific have the future? Yes or no? Abhivardhan?
Yeah, but a mid one.
Yes.
It will define the future.
Rishabh?
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Does Indo-Pacific have the future? Like
Yes,
yes or no? Final.
because everything is Indo-Pacific and Indo-Pacific is everything. Hence, it of course has a future.
So Indo-Pacific is Aham Brahmasmi. I like that.
Everybody's Indo-Pacific is their own Indo-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific never dies in the end. Indo-Pacific actually in
I
India
can tell
is
you
the
why.
second.
I can tell you why
Af-
Rishabh is so happy. It's because his team beat Chelsea 2-1 after being miserable for the entire
no, no,
season.
no, no. I think, and I'll probably end with this. I think the second, I think what is going to give, I think our next competitor for another state religion is after Hinduism and whatnot is going to be Indo-Pacific, at least in the strategic sphere. It is becoming a state religion.
Sorry, I can't stop laughing. That was a good note to end actually. So everyone, this is the end of the session. Abhivardhan, tell everyone where they can follow this in the future. The session, today's session.
Yeah. So it will be out on indian.substack.com. We are not pushing it on YouTube anymore. You just can subscribe us for free on indian.substack.com by ISIL. There, and then the Bharat Pacific on Spotify and other podcasting platforms. You'll find us. And yeah, it will also come on YouTube Music. So yeah. Ciao.
Yeah, you can just Google Bharat Pacific. There is no other
Just Google
institution with that name. It's a pretty
forget
unique name that we came up
Yeah.
with. So yeah, so you can just
bharatpacific.com.
yeah, then you can find everything there. So thank you, Yus. After a long time, this was really good one, and we did it after a long time. Thanks, Yus, again. Thanks, Rishabh. Thanks, Yuri, for joining. Thanks, Abhivardhan. Thanks, Abhishek. Thanks, Kushal. Thanks, Sougat. Thanks, everyone else, listeners, speakers, everyone. Goodbye, good night, and yeah, good night. That's it.